Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Israel launches retaliatory strikes on Iran after attacks on northern Israel. Trump calls for it to end and come to the negotiation table. Ukraine and European allies set out 5 conditions for reaching a just and lasting deal to end the war with Russia. And Armenia's Pashinyan declares victory in parliamentary election as vote counting continues. First this morning, tensions between Iran and Israel have sharply escalated following a new exchange of strikes that is threatening efforts to secure a wider regional ceasefire. US President Donald Trump has asked Israel not to retaliate and urged Iran to come to the negotiating table.
Iran launched multiple waves of missiles towards northern Israel on Sunday, marking its first direct attack on Israel since the April truce, which Tehran said was in retaliation for Israeli strikes on the outskirts of Beirut earlier that day. Israeli defense systems intercepted most of the missiles, according to the military. Explosions and air raid sirens were reported in Haifa and other areas of northern Israel, although there were no immediate reports of significant damage. Iran's Revolutionary Guard warned of further attacks if Israel continues its strikes.
Despite the previous warnings of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the child-killing Zionist regime has targeted Beirut's Zahieh by crossing all red lines and increasing attacks in southern Lebanon. We had previously warned that if the crime in the suburbs of Beirut expands, we will attack targets in the occupied territories. The Zionist army must stop its attacks on southern Lebanon and the suburbs, and if it expands its attacks on that region or responds to Iran's actions, it will face more crushing and regrettable blows, and destructive attacks will begin against the regime and its supporters.
The missile barrage came after Israel carried out airstrikes on military targets in western and central Iran and launched attacks on Beirut's southern suburbs earlier in the day. The Israeli military said the Beirut strikes targeted Hezbollah-linked sites in response to cross-border fire into Israeli territory. Local media reported that 2 apartments in separate buildings were hit in Beirut's southern suburbs, causing casualties. The latest escalation has further strained diplomatic efforts. US President Donald Trump had urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to retaliate against Iran, criticized the strikes on Beirut, and said Iran's missile attacks would not help ongoing negotiations. Iran has repeatedly said any agreement with Washington depends on a ceasefire holding in Lebanon. However, Sunday's Israeli strikes on Beirut have raised fresh doubts about prospects for a broader regional settlement.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the New York Times, leading with our top story this morning, and it has live updates calling Iran and Israel exchange strikes for the first time since April ceasefire. And as we scroll down a little bit more, you're able to see a video, but as the first report showed, Iran has launched a wave of missiles over on Sunday evening at Israel for the first time since the April ceasefire came into effect. Now Iran's Islamic IRGC says that the attack marked the beginning of a full week of continuous strikes, is what it's saying. These strikes come after Israel said that it struck Hezbollah targets in southern Beirut on Sunday, prompting threats from Iran in response to that. Now, the IGRC said in a statement that tonight's attacks on Israel served as a warning, adding, should Israel's acts of aggression referring to its attack on Lebanon earlier on the Sunday day be repeated further, responses would be broader, encompassing all US and Israeli targets in the region. It's also accused the US and Israel of failing to honor their commitments under the ceasefire between Iran, the US and Israel, which came into effect on April, as I mentioned. Now, Fox News reported that Trump had urged Iran and telling them that it's enough, get back to the table, is what President Donald Trump said, and then also spoke to several US international media outlets in the wake of Iran's missile strike, saying Prior to this call as well, he spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and told US media outlet Axios that he had planned to urge Netanyahu not to retaliate against Iran's attack. However, we know that those words have not been heeded to, with Israel responding again early this morning on Lebanon in response to what Iran had done to northern Israel. Now, the Iranian strikes didn't hurt anyone, is what Trump said, and each of them had their fun. Israel had its strike and Iran had its strike. We don't need another one, is what Trump said, adding that he was going to call Netanyahu right now and tell him not to retaliate. So that's the current situation that we are in right now. Everything feels very much like it's escalated a lot more than the past 3 days have shown. We know that Israel is very much on the attack when it comes to demolishing Hezbollah and anything around that. And Iran is now setting up a response, saying that this is something that they are going to continue throughout the week. But we'll provide you with more information as we get it and see whether or not there is some form of diplomacy within these three countries between the US, Israel and Iran. Okay, now let's move to another story this morning, and that's on Deutsche Welle in relation to Armenia, because they've been having elections on Sunday. Armenia election Prime Minister Pashinyan declares victory. Now, Armenian Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who you can see in the middle here with the bright hat on, has declared victory on early hours of this morning in a parliamentary election, with just over 1/5 of polling sites showing that his party was with around 54% of the vote currently. Now, in a press conference in the early hours, which is this press conference that you're seeing on your screens, Pashinyan said his civil contract party had prevailed, calling it a historic victory. Armenia's election commission had released early results from about 21% of polling stations by the time Pashinyan gave his conference speech. The early results showed civil contract clinching 54.5% of the vote and pro-Russian Strong Armenia Alliance in second place with 21.9% of the votes. The Armenia Alliance was in third place with 8.7%, and the Prosperous Armenia Party was trailing in fourth with roughly 5%. Now, the turnout in the country of 3 million people was strong at nearly 59% of eligible voters. So that's quite a successful turnout in the country, as well as the Central Election Commission is expected to announce official preliminary voting results on Monday. So in the next few hours, we should be able to know exactly what the end result was in relation to the voting for the Armenia elections. And later on, I will also have a guest to go through what this means for Armenia and the South Caucasus in general. Now, just to add, a key rival to Pashinyan was Samvel Karapetyan, who founded the Strong Armenia last year and campaigned on a pro-business platform and pledged to maintain Armenia's close ties to Russia. Now, a strong showing for Pashinyan would now give him a mandate to conclude peace negotiations with Azerbaijan. But we will definitely provide you with more information later on in the programme in relation to this win that will be later announced today. Okay, let's go to our next story this morning, and that is on the BBC in relation to Nigeria, because hundreds of captives freed from Boko Haram mountain hideout. Now, what we know is that now at least 360 people kidnapped by the Boko Haram, the jihadist group in Nigeria's northeastern Borno state, in March have been freed from a remote mountain hideout. Now, the circumstances around how they were freed is being currently disputed, but the army says it had launched an unprecedented intelligence-led operation that had been weeks in planning and taking the Islamist militants by surprise. But a local group, the Borno South Youth Initiative, says it mediated the unconditional release, putting the number of those freed at 416. Now, mass abductions by armed groups for ransom in Nigeria have become a common tactic in recent years, and though it is illegal to pay ransoms, we know that it does happen. And just a reminder, Boko Haram kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls from a village in the Chibok in 2014, and around 90 of whom remain still missing to this day. Now, a military spokesperson described the assault on the Boko Haram's Mandara mountain hideout under cover of darkness as one of the military's most significant hostage rescue operations in the northeast. And the authorities say the hostages are receiving medical care, but sadly 2 infants died due to exhaustion from prolonged captivity in harsh terrain. A special advisor to the president posted on X in relation to that. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's something that broke in the last couple of hours. That's on Al Jazeera's website. Powerful earthquake hits Philippines, triggering tsunami alerts across Asia. Now, a strong earthquake struck the southern Philippines at around about 7:37 their local time, and several countries in the region, including the Philippines, Indonesia and Japan, have all issued tsunami warnings. Now, we do have a picture, as you can see, coming up on your screens. We will have more information in relation to this story as we're getting more information and more video on the impact of what this particular earthquake has brought. Now, the quake had a magnitude of 7.8 and a depth of 10 kilometers, says the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. But initial estimates say that actually it's a lot bigger, and it was actually a 7.8 magnitude and a 50-kilometer deep, says the German Research Center of the Geosciences, while others say numbers differ in different places. But the Philippines president said he has directed all relevant government agencies to act immediately, urging people to move to higher ground, and said that the quake struck we know that the quake also struck off the coast of General Santos City, located in the Mindanao area and the Philippines' main southern island as well. But as I mentioned, we have more on this story later on in the program, so still please stay around for that, as we can bring you some more updates, especially if there have been any fatalities, because it has been quite severe. Well, that's your press roundup for now. We're now going to take a short break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories this morning. And Iran has rejected reports that the United States could use frozen Iranian assets to compensate Gulf countries for war-related damage, warning that any seizure of those funds would be illegal and would trigger a response from Tehran. Tehran is currently seeking the release of billions of dollars in blocked funds as part of ongoing negotiations to end the conflict. In a recent interview, US President Donald Trump said sanctions relief and access to Iranian assets would only be considered after a peace deal was reached. Trump also said that he was not demanding that Lebanon be included in any short-term agreement with Tehran, adding that the two sides were close to resolving remaining issues over Iran's nuclear program.
I think we're very close. We have a couple of points. They don't even seem like big points. They've conceded the fact that they will not have nuclear weapons. We had a clause in there that we will not develop nuclear weapons, and everybody was very happy with it except me. And I said, well, What happens if they not develop, but they go out and purchase, they acquire? I want to put the word, if they buy or purchase or acquire, you've got to have that in there too, because that's not developing.
Staying with this, the United States has drafted a resolution calling on Iran to disclose information about its bombed nuclear sites and stored enriched uranium. Washington is seeking international support ahead of this week's IAEA Board of Governors meeting. The resolution calls on Iran to provide full details about its nuclear materials and facilities and to allow inspectors complete access without delay. It does not call for Iran to be referred to the UN Security Council, while similar IAEA resolutions have previously won broad support. Stronger opposition is expected this time following US and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. The US mission to the IAEA declined to comment. Gaza's health authorities said on Sunday that 10 people were killed and 36 injured in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Hamas spokesperson Hazim Qasem said talks are continuing in Cairo with mediators from Egypt, Qatar and Turkey. The meeting aims to fully implement the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement and its humanitarian teams. It also seeks to stop what he called genocide and assassinations against Palestinians. He added that efforts are focused on ensuring fair enforcement of the US-backed Board of Peace. The leaders of Britain, France and Germany have backed Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's proposal for direct talks with Russia's President Vladimir Putin during a meeting in London. The diplomatic push comes as Kyiv and Moscow continue to exchange long-range strikes.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and French President Emmanuel Macron in London on Sunday to discuss support for Ukraine and possible steps towards ending the war. European leaders and Ukraine have agreed on 5 key conditions for what they describe as a just and lasting peace deal to end the war with Russia. They backed a proposal for direct talks between Zelenskyy and Russian President Vladimir Putin, with European and US participation, and called for an immediate ceasefire as the basis for negotiations. The leaders also discussed Ukraine's military needs, including additional air defense missiles, following some of the largest Russian air raids on Ukrainian cities in recent weeks. The talks followed Zelenskyy's recent proposal for a direct meeting with Putin, which the Russian president rejected, saying conditions were not yet in place for meaningful negotiations. Meanwhile, attacks were reported on both sides overnight. Russian drone attacks struck Kharkiv, with local authorities reporting multiple impacts as damage assessments continued. On the Russian side, Moscow-appointed authorities in occupied Crimea said a Ukrainian drone struck a passenger train early on Monday, killing an assistant driver and injuring the driver. Air raid alerts were also issued in the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk.
Turning to staying on Europe, but hundreds of people in the city capital of Albania have protested against a €1.4 billion resort project backed by US Special Envoy Jared Kushner. Demonstrators gathered outside the Prime Minister's office, chanting slogans and waving Albanian flags. The project, planned by Affinity Partners, is set to be built near a protected area. Environmentalists warn it could damage local wildlife habitats and pristine coastline. Conservation group Albania says the development could drive flamingos away from the area. Kushner unveiled the project in 2024. He withdrew from a similar project in Serbia last year following public protests. Pope Leo XIV is in Spain on a week-long visit focused on migration, social cohesion and the Church's role in modern-day Europe. Here's more on this story.
Pope Leo XIV has arrived in Spain with a sharp focus on immigration, social justice, and confronting the Catholic Church's internal crisis regarding clergy sexual abuse. This historic week-long visit, spanning Madrid, Barcelona, and the Canary Islands, is explicitly designed to turn papal attention back to Europe's Christian roots, while directly addressing the front line of the continent's migrant influx. Waving Vatican and Spanish flags, emotional crowds gathered outside Madrid's royal palace to welcome the pontiff as he prepares to navigate these heavy social and political landscapes.
I'm excited, so excited. It was about time a pope visited Spain.
I think it's a truly unique experience. There are no words to describe it.
Addressing King Felipe VI and listening government officials, Pope Leo delivered a forceful critique of modern Western populism. Drawing on Spain's medieval history where Christians, Muslims and Jews coexisted, he underscored that long-term stability is built on a culture of encounter, not confrontation.
Today, the temptation to gain popularity by fanning the flames of polarization seems to have grown rather than diminished, and human dignity continues to be violated. I invite everyone to set aside the divisive and polarizing narratives of your societal reality.
King Felipe reinforced this focus on human dignity, explicitly warning against the moral and social risks of unregulated artificial intelligence and modern technology.
New technology cannot be monopolized by a few, but must be an instrument in the hands of everyone that benefits all societies. That will only be possible if we keep people at the center of all speeches, never replaced, subjugated, or coerced by any algorithms.
The rigorous schedule ahead highlights the strategic weight of this papal mission. On Monday, Pope Leo will hold formal talks with Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez before becoming the first pontiff in history to address the Spanish Parliament. The journey will culminate in the Canary Islands, where the Pope, who has previously drawn sharp criticism from US President Donald Trump over his anti-immigration stances, is scheduled to directly meet with African migrants and the organizations dedicated to helping them.
We turn back to the US, and the White House is considering buying the Chagos Islands from Mauritius. The Telegraph reported that the United States is exploring a separate deal that would bypass the UK and secure control of the Diageo Garcia military base. The plan is being developed in the White House as an alternative to Britain's proposal to transfer sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius. The White House is said to be in regular talks with London on the issue. The UK government paused its plan to hand over the islands to Mauritius in April, which Trump called the plan a big mistake. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has used a D-Day anniversary address to impress NATO member partners on burden sharing. Speaking from the Normandy beaches, he said America would continue to lead, but warned that capable allies must stand beside Washington when it matters. Here's more.
Today, as we face an increasingly complex threat environment, we apply the lessons from 82 years ago learned on these beaches. Strong allies, each fully committed to doing their part, win wars. The men buried here fought in a warfighting alliance where every partner brought its full measure of industry, courage, and sacrifice. Not empty slogans, not lavish summits, not communiques. Real allies doing real things, taking real losses for a shared cause worth fighting and dying for. Each nation pulled its weight. Each nation bled. America will lead, and we must. But capable allies must be right there with us, shoulder to shoulder, in the breach, when it matters.
We turn to East Asia now, and a magnitude 7.8 earthquake has struck off the southern Philippine island of Mindanao on Monday, triggering tsunami warnings in the Philippines, Indonesia and nearby areas. The country's seismology agency said the highest tsunami wave recorded reached 1.4 meters as a coastal residents were urged to move to higher ground. Philippine authorities are also verifying reports of at least 5 deaths. Officials say aftershocks were continuing in affected areas, while power and phone outages were reported in parts of the region. Iran's national football team arrived in Mexico over the weekend ahead of the World Cup matches in the US. The squad flew in from Turkey and reached the border city early in the morning. Iran's Football Federation had moved the team's base from Arizona to Mexico at the last minute due to uncertainty over US visa arrangements. Although the US issued visas to players, some members of the support staff were not granted entry permits. Iran will play its first match against New Zealand on the 15th of June. Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional stories as well as what's been taking place in Armenia and its elections. And I'll be joined by a guest as well. Make sure you don't go anywhere.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging. Today is the third. We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. I'm here. Azerbaijan and Armenia.
From Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Bu'ainu.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's go to the region and we head first over to Armenia in the South Caucasus where early election results point to a win for Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, strengthening his position as key political decisions lie ahead. Let's go to this report.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has declared victory in the country's parliamentary election after early results showed his ruling Civil Contract Party ahead.
On June 7, 2026, regular elections to the National Assembly were held. As a result of the election, the Civil Contract Party won, and Civil Contract will form a government on its own. I thank all citizens of the Republic of Armenia who took part in the election and expressed their free will through their vote. I want to emphasize that, compared with 2021, the Civil Contract Party received votes from a larger number of citizens of the Republic of Armenia and received a stronger mandate of trust. The citizen of the Republic of Armenia chose the future and stood by peace. This means that, in the 2026 election, the citizen of the Republic of Armenia voted for number 16. Dear citizens of the Republic of Armenia, I love you all, I am proud of you all, and I bow before you all.
Speaking to reporters in the early hours of Monday, Pashinyan called the result a historic victory and said it belonged to the Armenian people. According to Armenia's Central Election Commission, Civil Contract was leading with more than 50% of the vote as counting continued. The strong Armenia Alliance was running second with around 20%, while the Armenia Alliance remained below 10%. The prosperous Armenia Party secured approximately 5% of the vote, enough to cross the electoral threshold and enter parliament.
The voting is over.
Voting ended at 8 p.m. local time on Sunday. Preliminary figures show that nearly 1.5 million voters cast ballots out of more than 2.5 million registered voters, putting turnout at just under 59%. A total of 16 political parties and 2 alliances contested the election, competing for seats in Armenia's 101-member National Assembly. Voting took place across more than 2,000 polling stations nationwide. Official preliminary results are expected later on Monday.
And as soon as we get those results, we'll definitely let you know. But Armenians have voted, and the final balance of power is still being calculated. Now, under Armenia's election system, votes must pass through thresholds and seat allocation rules before they become parliamentary seats. Here is a closer look at how Armenia turns election results into political power.
Polls have closed in Armenia's parliamentary elections. Millions of voters have chosen the country's next National Assembly. But the result is not decided by vote percentages alone. In Armenia, ballots pass through a complex seat allocation system before they become political power. Under Armenia's latest election code changes, the party threshold has been lowered from 5 to 4%. Blocs face a higher bar, 8% for 3 or fewer parties and 10% for 4 or more. Parliament must include at least 3 political forces and no minimum turnout is required. This is where the calculation begins. Only the votes of parties and blocs that enter Parliament are included in the seat allocation formula. Votes for parties left outside Parliament are not counted in this stage. That is why a party's vote share and its seat share may not be the same. The methodology moves through 3 main stages. First, the electoral threshold is applied. Second, 4 ethnic minority bonus seats are distributed. Third, the effective opposition adjustment may be applied if the ruling party exceeds the 2/3 limit. The 2021 election shows how this works. Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party received 688,761 votes. Using the first seat allocation formula, that result gave the party 68 seats. The Armenia Alliance received 268,300 votes and gained 26 seats. The I Have Honor Alliance received 66,650 votes and gained 7 seats. But the process did not end there. After the first allocation, Armenia added 4 ethnic minority seats. In 2021, Civil Contract received 3 of them, and the Armenia Alliance received 1. Then the Effective Opposition Adjustment added 2 more seats to the opposition, both for the Armenia Alliance. The final result was 71 seats for Civil Contract, 29 for the Armenia Alliance, and 7 for the I Have Honor Alliance. So in Armenia, the election does not end at the ballot box. Votes are counted first, then they are converted into power.
And if that wasn't clear, we do have a guest now joining me to go through exactly what all that means right now, as well as what these election results show. I've got Vasif Husanov, Head of Department of the Center for Analysis of International Relations, here with me to go through this important election. Welcome to the program today. We've been talking about upcoming Armenia elections for a while on the program, just because of how important it is for the South Caucasus and Armenia and Azerbaijan's relationship together, especially following last year's signature signing of the peace process in Washington. Now, we have some early polling results. We don't have it officially confirmed as yet, but we do know that it's likely that Pashinyan's government has prevailed and actually won through. What does that result mean for President Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Armenia's political future?
Pashinyan's victory was more or less expected because he is currently the most popular political figure in Armenia and has actually brought lots of goods to Armenian society, its foreign policy, domestic political stability, as well as economic situation over the past years since he got re-elected in 2021. That's the reason why it was more or less expected that he will win the elections. And another reason why his election was pretty much predicted was the fact that the opposition groups are not that much popular, and particularly those groups which are supported by Russia, particularly stronger Armenian Alliance, led by Samuel Karapetyan, and also Armenian Alliance led by Robert Kacharyan. Those 2 political forces were particularly viewed by the society as agents of external powers, and to be more precise, agent of Russia. And Armenian society, Armenian people do not have that much pleasure memories with the political forces which supported by Russia, promoted by Russia in Armenia. And that's another reason why Pashinyan's election was, his victory was pretty much predicted. And what it means for Armenia's future, of course, Pashinyan pursued his electoral campaign on the basis of peace agenda with Azerbaijan. And immediately after the elections, when he declared his victory, he said that his next term will be again oriented around the peace process with Azerbaijan, opening the borders with Turkey. So these are all good news for the region. The only problem is that in order for Pashinyan to push for constitutional change and referendum, he needed 2/3 of the seats in the parliament. And current results show that he is not going to have constitutional majority. It's just a little over 50%, which means that he will be able to form a single party government, but it doesn't mean that he will be able to call for constitutional change through the parliament. So that's the reason why it will complicate the process, and the fact that the opposition groups in the parliament will be very much against the constitutional change, referendum, peace process with Azerbaijan. This shows that despite the fact that Pashinyan's victory is good news overall for the South Caucasus, but the situation in the Armenian parliament will very much complicate the process, and including peace process with Azerbaijan, opening borders with Turkey. And this all shows that we are going to pass through a very much uncertain and unstable period in the upcoming months and years.
Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it, then, in the sense of, yes, he's won the broader victory of the vote, but the constitutional part of it is where the challenges are going to lie, and he's going to get a lot of pushback in regards to that. Is that something that Azerbaijan should be aware of? Should the South Caucasus be very much like, yes, he's got another term in government, but this could also add delays because of the constitutional framework and because of parties that will push against it?
Yeah, absolutely. It will be a pretty much unpredictable period, as I mentioned. Azerbaijan's position on the peace treaty with Armenia is very clear, that Azerbaijan is not planning to sign the peace treaty unless Armenia changes constitution and removes territorial claims against Azerbaijan from its constitution. So that position is determined. It has been reiterated by Azerbaijani government, Azerbaijan authorities on multiple occasions. So it shows that the upcoming years, particularly the next few months, will be very much uncertain for the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Pashinyan has declared on multiple occasions that he is willing to change the constitution and remove territorial claims against Azerbaijan from the constitution. And as around 50% of Armenian people voted for Pashinyan, it shows that at least half of the population support the peace process with Azerbaijan. So therefore, Pashinyan may try to find some other tools in order to push for the constitutional change. But electoral jurisdiction, electoral law is pretty much clear that it needs two-thirds of vote of the parliament, which will be
quite tough. Yeah. Just on that, though, we do know on the Saturday, 6 candidates for the pro-Russian party were arrested a day before they were due to stand in the general elections, which state media reported without giving any reasons for their arrests or detentions. What does that tell us about the impact about these elections and the illegitimacy of the final result?
You know, first of all, it's very clear that Armenia's democracy is not a consolidated democracy. It is not an ideal, flawless democracy at all. The recent electoral campaigns were marked very significant violations, both internally and externally. Internally, as you said, lots of candidates and also some political figures were arrested prior to the elections. And externally, it happened against the background of very geopolitically charged environment, where external powers, including Russia, European Union, United States, interfered. And on the other hand, it showed, again, the double standards in world politics. While Armenia's political process were not democratic, were marked with significant violations, including carried out by the government of Pashinyan. But we observed how European Union and United States supported this process, despite the fact that it was not democratic at all. So it was this demonstration of double standards in world politics in a very clear way. And also the fact that Russia, of course, interfered in the elections. Russia supported political forces which were against Pashinyan. And in the recent weeks, we saw how much pressure from the Russian side was exerted on the Armenian government. So in that context, the elections were not carried out in ideal environment, but nevertheless, whether it was not illegitimate, it is up to Armenian people to decide. From outside, we can observe how many violations took place in the process, but it's a fact that Pashinyan's victory is a good news for the South Caucasus, and that's the reason why we particularly prioritize that aspect of the elections rather than its domestic dynamics.
Yes, which makes perfect sense. And I guess now looking at it, we'll hear more exactly what those final results are, but we do know that Nikol Pashinyan has won this particular election. But when it comes to foreign powers, and especially as you mentioned, Russia, how will they respond to the news that Nikol Pashinyan has now got a second term in Armenia? What would their position be? They know that he, as you mentioned, the constitutional, there's a power play within that they could push back on. But what would be their response?
Despite the fact that Pashinyan does not have constitutional majority and will have very tough period in the peace process with Azerbaijan and Turkey, he will have very strong mandate to pursue the European integration process, which is absolutely unwelcomed by the Russian side. That's the reason why over the past several months, we have seen Russian authorities talking about Armenia's geopolitical choice in a very clear terms, that Armenia cannot sit at the two tables at the same time. It must decide whether it will pursue European integration or whether it will stay in Eurasian Economic Union. In that context, recently, Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, Alexei Overchuk, clearly stated that European Union is no longer an economic union. It's a military political union. And Armenia's integration into that union is a betrayal to Armenia's friendship alliance with Russia, within the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, as well as within the Eurasian Economic Union. So that's the reason why the developments over the past several months show that Pashinyan's victory is going to bring lots of tensions between Moscow and Yerevan. It is very much clear. But at the same time, both sides will likely try to pursue this process in more or less stable way without causing sudden abruption in the relations. Because for Russia, of course, Armenia is a very important ally. Russia has its military base in the territories of Armenia, and Armenia is dependent on Russia in economic terms, particularly. Although Prime Minister Pashinyan is trying to minimize this dependency by developing relations with the European Union, with the United States, as well as with Azerbaijan and Turkey. It's a very important point in that context. Azerbaijan's and Turkey's position are very important for Armenia's independence, economic independence, political, military, security terms. So that's the reason why upcoming months will going quite unpredictable, unstable for Russia-Armenia relations.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because it's a very tricky dance that Armenia will have to do, and it'd be quite noticeable what Pashinyan decides to be his top main goal or aim in the first 100 days of his new term now that he's been voted in. But I just want to go back to the results which are currently being counted at the moment. Do you think they will be happily accepted, or do you think there'll be a challenge to what, or contested in a meaningful way as to how these results are received in Armenia?
You know, the opposition groups have already started to contest the outcomes of the elections, particularly the fact that Pashinyan announced his victory while just 15% of the votes were counted was a shock to the opposition, and they criticized it, they contested it. And they will likely take pretty much confrontational position towards Pashinyan after the elections. But whether it will lead to any meaningful change is unlikely. Over the past years, we have seen lots of attempts by the opposition groups in Armenia to organize rallies, to organize some demonstrations, meetings against Pashinyan, to overthrow him prematurely before the elections. But all these attempts failed. The reality is that, and confirmed by the outcomes of the elections, Pashinyan's agenda, peace agenda, is very much supported by significant part of the population. And that's the reason why all those fear-mongering statements of the opposition have been rejected by a significant part of the population. That's the reason why I don't personally expect any significant pressure against Pashinyan's government after the elections. Of course, the opposition will try to do their best to contest it, to maintain pressure on Pashinyan's domestic and external policies, but they are unlikely to cause significant change.
And has there been any criticism then in relation to international actors looking at Armenia's election process, whether or not they feel that it's also being run in the most legitimate way? Just because during the Georgian parliamentary elections in 2024, there was a lot of chatter in relation to how things were conducted there. It doesn't seem that the same weight has been given to Armenia, and I don't know whether or not there's more leniency, or the fact that we have a war going on in the Middle East, or different other distractions happening. Why do we not feel that the same attention is being applied to Armenia?
You know, it is now very much clear that for the European Union, for the United States, number one priority is their geopolitical standing, their national interest. And that's the reason why it doesn't matter anymore to anyone in the European Union or the United States whether some political figure in the post-Soviet space is democratic or not. Number one priority is that person's geopolitical orientation. And in that context, Pashinyan's orientation was towards the European Union and was and is towards the European Union and the United States. That's the reason why we haven't observed any criticism from those groups in the West about violations, electoral violations in the Armenian politics prior to the parliamentary elections. As you mentioned very much rightly, in the case of Georgia, we had seen very opposite, very different attitude from the Western actors. And the reason is very much clear that Georgian Dream Party, ruling party in Georgia, has been trying to maintain some balance between the West, Russia, China, and they were not following the Euro-Atlantic integration anymore. Mm-hmm. And all these geopolitical choices were unwelcomed by the Western actors. And that's the reason why they tried to focus on democratic credentials of the Georgian government while they turned blind eye to what Pashinyan was and is doing internally.
Well, we're definitely going to find out more information about how this parliamentary election results will look on the wider scale. But just in relation to Pashinyan, what do you think his primary aims now that it's likely that he's won the elections and the voting? What will be on his main agenda, his top 5 things that he now needs to focus on now that he's going to continue his leadership there?
He has already announced some targets for the next term. And one of them was, of course, related with the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as normalization of relations with Turkey. He announced that this is going to remain as a top priority of external policy of Armenia for the next term, as well as he talked about European integration process. And it's very likely that he will try to minimize relations or allied relations between Armenia and Russia for the next term, while expanding and deepening relations with the European Union and the United States. And in that context, it's also likely that for the next term, we will see his attempts to quit CSTO completely. Armenia has already suspended its participation in Russia's military bloc, and Russian authorities have stated that Armenia is no longer participating in any activities of the CSTO. So it shows that it is just one step before leaving the organization military bloc completely. And most likely we will see Pashinyan leaving the CSTO completely for the next term. We may also see some downgrading of relations with the Eurasian Economic Union because Pashinyan talked about European integration process, which means that in order to pursue EU membership, he needs to leave the Eurasian Economic Union completely. But it's a fact that it's unlikely for Armenia to become EU member in the next 10, 20 years. It's a process, but the fact that it is a choice of the Armenian government, geopolitical choice, it's already very big news for Russia, for EU, for the South Caucasus. That's the reason why we will see most likely more and more deterioration of relations between Russia and Armenia in the upcoming months and years.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hussainov, for coming on to the programme and to explaining that to our viewers, because, as you mentioned, it's very important to the South Caucasus and definitely important to Azerbaijan as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, time for a quick break now. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Israel launches retaliatory strikes on Iran after attacks on northern Israel. Trump calls for it to end and to come to negotiation table. Ukraine and European allies set out 5 conditions for reaching a just and lasting deal to end the war with Russia. And Armenia's Nikol Pashinyan declares victory in parliamentary election as voting counts still continue. Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to CNN's website in relation to what's gone on in the Philippines, where a 7.8 magnitude earthquake hits southern Philippines. Tsunami warnings issued regionally. Now a strong earthquake has struck the country at around 7:37 this morning local time, and several countries in the area as well, including Indonesia and Japan, who have now issued tsunami warnings. Now the quake had a magnitude of 7.0, but that figure is actually being kind of in the sense of detested, in the sense of that it could actually be a lot higher, disputed a lot higher than that particular number. Now we do know that this has caused a number of buildings to fall down. We don't have any figures on any fatalities, but we will have more information later on in the program. But Philippines president has said that it has directed all relevant government agencies to act immediately, urging for people to move to higher ground as well, because there's since been triggers in the area. And the quake struck off the coast of General Santos City, which is located in the Mindanao area and the Philippines' main southern island. But we have more information on this later on in the program, just to let you know exactly how big that earthquake was, because a number of power outages has also happened in the Philippines due to this. And as you can see here from the picture now rising, half of a building is completely damaged, as well as a number of other the other impact that this earthquake has brought about. But we will keep you updated in regards to this story. Now we've turned over to our next story this morning on Deutsche Welle in relation to the South Caucasus, because the Armenian elections took place yesterday evening. It closed at around 8 o'clock local time, and Prime Minister Pashinyan has declared victory already. Now votes are being counted, but Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has declared victory this Monday, on the early hours of this Monday, with just 1/5 of the polling sites showing that his party had around 54% of the votes. In a press conference, which is what you're seeing here, this is a picture of Pashinyan in a press conference early hours of today, saying that his party, the Civil Contract Party, had prevailed, calling it a historic victory. Armenia's election commission had released early results from about 21% of the polling stations by the time Pashinyan had given his press conference, and early results showed that Civil Contract clinching 54.5% of the vote, the pro-Russian Strong Armenia Alliance in second place, and then you had the Armenian Alliance with third place with 8.7, and the Prosperous Armenia Party trailing in fourth place. And we have more details about that later on in the program. But just to let you know that turnout of the voting collectively of the 3 million population in Armenia was around 59% of eligible voters came out to vote, and the Central Election Commission is expected to announce the official preliminary voting results on Monday. And that 59% of turnout is actually a lot better than what was seen in 2017, according to an expert in relation to this particular story. And just to add to that, Pashinyan's key rival is Samvel Karapetyan, who founded the Strong Armenia Party last year and campaigned on pro-business platform and a pledge to keep strong ties with Russia, which a lot of the Armenian people did not want, which is also helped Pashinyan in his victory this morning, and a strong need as well for the mandate to conclude peace negotiations with Azerbaijan is also another strong factor in Pashinyan clenching that victory win. Okay, now let's move over to our next story, the third story this morning, which is our top story in relation to what's going on with Israel and Iran, because Iran has launched a wave of missiles at Israel for the first time since the April ceasefire came into effect. Now, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says that the attack marked the beginning of a full week of continuous strikes. So you can just imagine how this week is going to look. As you can see from the BBC's, what they've posted up on their website, showing missiles going to in the skies, heading over. I believe these are the ones that Iran has sent over to northern Israel, and the strikes. And that's all because Israel actually sent targets to Beirut on Sunday, prompting threats from Iran, which is why the IGRC said in a statement that the attacks on Israel served as a warning, adding that Israel acts out of aggression, referring to its attack on Lebanon, saying that further responses would be would be a lot broader, encompassing all US and Israeli targets in the region. Now, Iran has also accused the US and Israel of failing to honor their commitments under the ceasefire between Iran, the US and Israel, which came into effect in April. And Fox News actually reported that Trump was urging Iran saying that that's enough to get back to the negotiating table, for them to come up with a deal and a plan and to stop the retaliatory missiles from both Israel and Iran in relation to this. But now let's go to our report that has more information on this particular story so that you can actually understand what's taken place in the last 24 hours.
Iran launched multiple waves of missiles towards northern Israel on Sunday, marking its first direct attack on Israel since the April truce, which Tehran said was in retaliation for Israeli strikes on the outskirts of Beirut earlier that day. Israeli defense systems intercepted most of the missiles, according to the military. Explosions and air raid sirens were reported in Haifa and other areas of northern Israel, although there were no immediate reports of significant damage. Iran's Revolutionary Guard warned of further attacks if Israel continues its strikes.
Despite the previous warnings of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the child-killing Zionist regime has targeted Beirut's Zahieh by crossing all red lines and increasing attacks in southern Lebanon. We had previously warned that if the crime in the suburbs of Beirut expands, we will attack targets in the occupied territories. The Zionist army must stop its attacks on southern Lebanon and the suburbs, and if it expands its attacks on that region or responds to Iran's actions, it will face more crushing and regrettable blows, and destructive attacks will begin against the regime and its supporters.
The missile barrage came after Israel carried out airstrikes on military targets in western and central Iran and launched attacks on Beirut's southern suburbs earlier in the day. The Israeli military said the Beirut strikes targeted Hezbollah-linked sites in response to cross-border fire into Israeli territory. Local media reported that 2 apartments in separate buildings were hit in Beirut's southern suburbs, causing casualties. The latest escalation has further strained diplomatic efforts. US President Donald Trump had urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to retaliate against Iran, criticized the strikes on Beirut, and said Iran's missile attacks would not help ongoing negotiations. Iran has repeatedly said any agreement with Washington depends on a ceasefire holding in Lebanon. However, Sunday's Israeli strikes on Beirut have raised fresh doubts about prospects for a broader regional settlement.
Staying on the Middle East, Iran has rejected reports that the US could use frozen Iranian assets to compensate Gulf countries for war-related damage, warning that any seizure of funds would be illegal and would trigger a response from Tehran. It says it currently is seeking the release of billions of dollars blocked in funds as it's part of its ongoing negotiations to end the conflict. In a recent interview, President Donald Trump said sanctions relief and access to Iranian assets would only be considered after a peace deal is reached. Trump also mentioned that he was not demanding that Lebanon be included in any short-term agreement, with Tehran adding that the 2 sides were close to resolving remaining issues over Iran's nuclear program.
I think we're very close. We have a couple of points. They don't even seem like big points. They've conceded the fact that they will not have nuclear weapons. We had a clause in there that we will not develop nuclear weapons, and everybody was very happy with it except me. And I said, well, what happens if they not develop, but they go out and purchase, they acquire? I want to put the word, if they buy or purchase or acquire, you've got to have that in there too, because that's not developing.
Now moving over to Gaza, because its health authorities said on Sunday that 10 people were killed and 36 injured in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Hamas spokesperson Hazem Qasim said talks are continuing in Cairo with mediators from Egypt, Qatar and Turkey. The meeting aims to fully implement the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement and its humanitarian terms. It's also seeking to stop what it called genocide and assassinations against Palestinians. He added that the efforts are focused on ensuring fair enforcement of the US-backed Board of Peace. Chinese President Xi Jinping is due to visit North Korea on Monday for a 2-day trip, his first in 7 years, where he will hold talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. The focus is expected to be on strengthening bilateral ties, expanding cooperation, and discussing regional security issues, as well as North Korea's relations with other powers. Xi said on Monday that China's policy is to deepen relations with North Korea, oppose hegemony, sorry, I can't say that word, and militarism, and promote a fair international order and multilateral cooperation. Staying on this topic and here to further discuss Xi's trip to North Korea is Andrew K.P. Leung, international and independent China strategist in Hong Kong. Welcome to the programme this morning. Right, so let's just get straight into it. Can you describe to our viewers the relationship that Xi has with Kim Jong-un and what the West might underestimate because of that? Because we know that Xi is actually leaving his own country. He's seen so many leaders come to him. He's now going to North Korea, the first one since he's last been there in 2017. How significant is that?
Well, this visit must be viewed in the context of the very intense geopolitics happening around the world, in the sense that the United States, as the world hegemon, is still pushing back against China as a potential challenger. And of course, with President Trump, Make America Great Again coercion against other countries that fracture the whole world's so-called liberal world order led by the United States, and opens up all sorts of dynamics. Now, as far as the North Korea is concerned, of course, in a kind of in terms of alliances, the United States have got many more alliances compared with China, its potential challenger. But then, on the other hand, Beijing bangs on its very close relationship with Russia, with Iran, and for that matter, North Korea, because all these countries are targeted by the United States as their enemies, and so Beijing wants a closer alliance between these countries. Now, if North Korea also very important because it is a semi-nuclear state. It's got some nuclear capabilities alongside with long-range delivering systems. If you look at the map, Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, is very close to Beijing. And so it pays Beijing to maintain a much closer relationship with North Korea, particularly after North Korea is recent months pivoted towards Russia, as not only sending soldiers to fight for Russia in Ukraine, but also forming closer military alliance with Russia. So as a kind of maintaining a delicate balance again, it pays Beijing to form closer relationship. Now, secondly, I think that if you look at the nuclear, one of the most important issue in the relationship is North Korea's wanting to expand its nuclear capabilities, and that's the main reason why it's targeted by the United States. But on the other hand, let's not forget the so-called six-party talks led by the United States over the past so many, even decades, with President Trump a number of years ago crossing the border to shake hands with President Kim without resulting in anything, because the United States always wanted North Korea to surrender everything before they even relax on the sanctions. But now Kim is learning the tricks and borrowing, taking a leaf from Chairman Mao's book, wanting to develop its nuclear bomb ahead of developing its economy. And with the possession of nuclear delivery capabilities is able to play a much more important role around the region.
Well, Mr. Long, sorry to cut you off there. Sorry, you've said so much, and I kind of want to just go back and pick up a few things that you mentioned, especially in relation to North Korea's relationship with Russia and its influence in that, but not only that, its nuclear capabilities. Could you say that China was very much concerned by North Korea's growing interest in its nuclear capabilities and what it wants to grow, being so close, as you mentioned, to China, and what this could mean for on the broader scale? Is this something that Xi is very much concerned about? And if so, what is he doing in order to maintain or to juggle that particular balance of power?
Well, of course, it is not in China's interest to see a nuclear power North Korea, because they would trigger nuclearization in the region, not least South Korea, not least Japan, and apart from anywhere else in the world. So I think that but for North Korea, the ability to possess some sort of nuclear power is an insurance policy for its internal security. So I think that this is, I don't think that North Korea is likely to give up its capacity for developing nuclear weapons, just like even Iran. If you look at what's happening there in Iran as well, because with the great power coercion, the best defense is ability to possess or near capacity to possess nuclear nuclear deterrence. But I think that this is a very tricky path, and hence this visit, and to make sure that the North Korea does not veer towards a full nuclear state, but on the other hand, maintaining a close relationship with North Korea as part of the China's alliance with Russia, with Iran, against American coercion around the world.
Very quickly then, what do you think will be the outcome of these 2 days? Would everything that Xi Jinping has set on his agenda with North Korea be realized, or is this a long, a kind of like a long plan to make sure that North Korea stays in line with what China's plan is when it comes to foreign policy between the two countries? Or is this more of a friendship, or a larger scale for other countries to see that they're in close ties together?
Well, there is much more at stake for North Korea apart from talks, apart the principles. I think both countries understand these geopolitics very well. But what North Korea wants is to increase its statecraft in the sense of governing North Korea as a normal country, developing its economy, playing a more important role in the region, and then that depends greatly on economics. And of course, the North Korean economy is in tatters, and that would threaten the stability of its regime. And China is in the best position to develop the economy of North Korea. In the past, China only supplies food supplies, fuel, and other matters. But developing this economy is very important. And let's look at the example of North Vietnam before Vietnam becomes a full country, and because of the economy. Because when North Vietnam was targeted by the United States in the Vietnam War, its economy was in tatters. And I think that North Korea wants to develop its economy, wants to be to show around the world as a normal country, exemplified by the recent participation, even in Asian football for women, on which they won a prize.
Wow.
So I think this showcases Kim is trying to position himself as a leader of a normal country, able to develop his economy and then bring in benefits for his people, but at the same time, developing its insurance policy against great power coercion with its capacity to possess some degree of nuclear deterrence.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your comments on that and for basically explaining what this visit will mean in general over the next couple of days. So thank you very much, Mr. Long, for joining me this morning. Now we turn over to Europe, and the leaders of Britain, France and Germany have backed Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's proposal for direct talks with Russia's President Vladimir Putin during a meeting in London. The diplomatic push comes as Kyiv and Moscow continue to exchange long-range strikes. Here's more.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and French President Emmanuel Macron in London on Sunday to discuss support for Ukraine and possible steps towards ending the war. European leaders and Ukraine have agreed on 5 key conditions for what they describe as a just and lasting peace deal to end the war with Russia. They backed a proposal for direct talks between Zelenskyy and Russian President Vladimir Putin, with European and US participation, and called for an immediate ceasefire as the basis for negotiations. The leaders also discussed Ukraine's military needs, including additional air defense missiles, following some of the largest Russian air raids on Ukrainian cities in recent weeks. The talks followed Zelenskyy's recent proposal for a direct meeting with Putin, which the Russian president rejected, saying conditions were not yet in place for meaningful negotiations. Meanwhile, attacks were reported on both sides overnight. Russian drone attacks struck Kharkiv, with local authorities reporting multiple impacts as damage assessments continued. On the Russian side, Moscow-appointed authorities in occupied Crimea said a Ukrainian drone struck a passenger train early on Monday, killing an assistant driver and injuring the driver. Air raid alerts were also issued in the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk.
Turning to East Asia, and a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck off the southern Philippine island of Mindanao on Monday, triggering tsunami warnings in the Philippines, Indonesia and nearby areas. The country's seismology agency said the highest tsunami wave recorded reached 1.4 meters as coastal residents were urged to move to higher ground. Philippine authorities are also verifying reports of at least 5 deaths. Officials say that aftershocks were continuing in affected areas, while power and phone outages were reported in parts of the region. Japanese authorities in the north area of Tokyo suspended classes at primary and middle schools on Monday after the area's first recorded bear sighting. The animal was first spotted in a residential neighborhood on Saturday and remained at large after being seen again near a middle school early on Monday. The incident comes as bear encounters and attacks are increasing across Japan, with experts linking the trend to climate change in food supplies and shifts in rural land use. Very scary. You wouldn't want to be caught out with that bear. Well, we turn over to the Peruvian presidential candidate Roberto Sanchez, who has greeted supporters in Lima after an Ipsos quick count put him narrowly ahead of rival Keiko Fujimori in the 2026 runoff election. Sanchez greeted supporters in Lima after the count gave him a slim lead. He said the result showed Peruvians wanted democracy and justice and called for a pardon for former President Pedro Castillo. The race remains extremely close, with official vote counting continuing throughout the night. Now to another election, but in Armenia, where its early election results point to a win for Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, strengthening his position as key political decisions lie ahead. Here's more.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has declared victory in the country's parliamentary election after early results showed his ruling Civil Contract Party ahead.
On June 7, 2026, regular elections to the National Assembly were held. As a result of the election, the Civil Contract Party won, and Civil Contract will form a government on its own. I thank all citizens of the Republic of Armenia who took part in the election and expressed their free will through their vote. I want to emphasize that, compared with 2021, the Civil Contract Party received votes from a larger number of citizens of the Republic of Armenia and received a stronger mandate of trust. The citizen of the Republic of Armenia chose the future and stood by peace. This means that in the 2026 election, the citizen of the Republic of Armenia voted for number 16. Dear citizens of the Republic of Armenia, I love you all, I am proud of you all, and I bow before you all.
Speaking to reporters in the early hours of Monday, Pashinyan called the result a historic victory and said it belonged to the Armenian people. According to Armenia's Central Election Commission, Civil Contract was leading with more than 50% of the vote as counting continued. The Strong Armenia Alliance was running second with around 20%, while the Armenia Alliance remained below 10%. The Prosperous Armenia Party secured approximately 5% of the vote, enough to cross the electoral threshold and enter parliament.
The voting is over.
Voting ended at 8 p.m. local time on Sunday. Preliminary figures show that nearly 1.5 million voters cast ballots out of more than 2.5 million registered voters, putting turnout at just under 59%. A total of 16 political parties and 2 alliances contested the election, competing for seats in Armenia's 101-member National Assembly. Voting took place across more than 2,000 polling stations nationwide. Official preliminary results are expected later on Monday.
And just to confirm, we just had the latest result of the Armenian elections, and it now is confirmed that Nikol Pashinyan's party, the Civil Contract Party, has won this historic landmark victory with 49.81% of the vote. So just to confirm, we did say that we were going to bring you an update, and now we have it. Nikol Pashinyan has secured a win in Armenia, in the Armenian elections. So there you go. Now, after that breaking news, we now go over to the world of tech, and Google has released an experimental app that can make illustrations of your life, as well as the EU is moving away from US-based search sites, and Microsoft is diving deeper into artificial intelligence. Here's more from A News' Nathan Kamanga with more on Switch.
Have you ever wondered what your life would look like as a story? Well, you're in luck, my friend, because Google has just released an app that's capable of turning your life into an illustration. It's called Dream Beans, and the app collects data from across the Google services you use. And yes, that includes photos and search history. And then the app generates a list of AI illustrated stories. The stories could be suggestions based on what the app has picked up from your calendar, or it could be ads based on your search history. Google says that only the user can view the app's stories and can control what services it collects data from. So give Dream Beans a try, though it's worth noting that it's currently only available for eligible US-based Google AI Ultra subscribers. If that's you, I just hope your stories aren't a horror show. Now, big news from the European Union that has announced that its parliament will make a switch to the French search engine Qwant from Google. The move comes as the bloc pushes to reduce its reliance on US technology. So I decided to give Qwant a try, just to see how good it is compared to Google. I gave both search engines the task of finding restaurants around me. Google's results showcased specific places and even included a rating and a price range. Qwant, on the other hand, came back with links to websites, of which the first 4 were ads. So maybe Qwant just can't compete yet. But to be fair, I'm pretty sure the European Parliament has more important things to search for than restaurants. Now, Microsoft has unveiled a new platform that it says will deliver an AI agent-first experience. It's called Project Solara, and the platform is built on the idea that the next era of computing will shift from apps to AI agents. Now, I know that sounds a little confusing, so here's what's really going on. Right now, you use different apps for different tasks, often switching between them to get a single job done. Microsoft says AI agents could simplify that process by carrying out tasks across multiple services based on a single command. To demonstrate the idea, the company showcased a wearable badge concept that can run an AI agent. Microsoft says it could help workers in fields such as healthcare by assisting with tasks like patient check-ins, documentation, and verification. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to catch up with us for more tech news and insights on the next show.
Now to the world of sport, because football fans have gathered in Miami Beach for a World Cup sticker trading event, swapping duplicates and searching for missing players just days before the tournament begins. The event brought together collectors of all ages with Panini albums as children and adults sorted through stacks of stickers and negotiated trades. Organisers said that the event showed how sticker trading continues to bring fans together before the world's biggest football tournament event starts tomorrow. Well, that's your update for the morning. Please make sure you stay tuned to A News throughout the coming day, only because we have so many more updates, especially looking further into the Armenian elections now that we know that Nicole Pashinyan has secured the victory win. I'll be back tomorrow on The Morning to provide you with the latest news and headlines. Stay connected with us.